Welcome to Cognitive Spirals, exploring the latest research into consciousness, cognition, and machine intelligence. Today, we're diving deep into a really fascinating area, implicit chain of thought reasoning through knowledge distillation. It's a mouthful, I know. It is a bit of a mouthful, yeah, but it's also super relevant to how we're starting to understand how AI, and maybe even our own minds, solve problems. I'm excited to unpack it.
Me too. I've been reading some preliminary work in this area, and it's really got me thinking about how this could influence both physical and mental health strategies. It's actually kind of mind-blowing.
Totally. From my angle, it's all about how these large concept models are basically mimicking and maybe even surpassing some of our own cognitive abilities. I mean, that's a big deal, right? So let's break it down. All right, so let's start with the basics. Implicit chain of thought reasoning. What even is that? I mean, we all kind of intuitively know what a chain of thought is, right? It's like when we break a problem down into smaller steps. But how does it become implicit? Yeah, so think about it like this. Normally with an AI model, if we ask it to solve a complex math problem, it shows you all the steps, right? Like the chain of reasoning, but with implicit reasoning, it figures out the answer without explicitly showing the intermediary steps, and that's kind of mirroring how we often think.
Right. It's like when you instinctively know how to tie your shoelaces. You don't consciously think about each step, but you still perform the action. And that's actually really fascinating when you consider how deeply ingrained some of our healthy habits are.
So, knowledge distillation is basically a way of making a larger, more complex model teach a smaller, faster model. The bigger model has this deep understanding, and we extract, distill that knowledge to train the smaller one. So you don't need all that computing power, right? Right, yes, and the key here is that the smaller model doesn't just learn to spit out answers. It also implicitly learns the reasoning process, even if it doesn't demonstrate it as clearly. It's learning the essence of problem solving. It's learning to think without saying its thought process, so to speak.
This is so relevant to the idea of building lasting health habits. I mean, it's like when you start consciously making a healthy decision, like choosing stairs over the elevator. In the beginning, it's a conscious effort, but over time, it becomes automatic. It's distilled into the very fabric of your behavior, your implicit habit. That is so cool.
And isn't that what we are trying to do with AI? We are trying to create a system that has that implicit understanding of, well, everything. Like all the variables and all the little nuances so it can then make more human-like decisions. Yeah, precisely. So, in terms of the research, how are scientists actually achieving this implicit chain of thought? What's the process they're using? Well, it's not a single method, but a lot of it revolves around training the larger, complex teacher model on massive data sets where the chain of thought is explicitly available. Then, they train the smaller model to mimic the outputs of the teacher, but without the need for explicitly stating reasoning, and the process in between becomes implicit. So, it's like learning by observing. We learn so much just by watching someone else go through the motions, and then internalizing the process. Like, I learned my most effective workout routine by watching other people in the gym, not from a textbook. And eventually that knowledge became implicit, and now I just do it. Exactly. And from my point of view, the process of distilling knowledge into smaller, more efficient models mirrors the process of how we streamline and automate repetitive tasks we don't need to constantly be reminding ourselves how to make a sandwich. And think of the speed gains here, If you don't need to go through every single step, you become so much more efficient. That makes sense. So, the smaller model, even though it doesn't show the steps, it somehow internalizes the underlying logic and the reasoning happens implicitly, yeah? Yes, exactly. It learns the how without always having to say why. And this is where the cognitive benefits come in, because this process of learning allows us to automate our cognitive processes. It goes from deliberate to automatic. Okay, so I'm thinking about how we could use this in practice for health initiatives. Like, imagine creating a program where people are exposed to models of healthier behaviors that show implicit reasoning, and then, through that exposure, they start adopting those habits without having to be explicitly told why it's healthier. The power there is just crazy.
I'm seeing it too. Imagine an AI-powered life coach that, instead of telling you to do things, it shows you. It models the behavior, and then you pick it up implicitly. That's pretty wild. And maybe we're also looking at a future where AI systems can help streamline our decision-making by acting as that expert who internalizes complex information and distills it down to more actionable, implicit recommendations.
Yeah, and what is fascinating for me here is how this kind of implicit learning links with CBT. Oftentimes, in CBT, we focus on making our thought processes explicit,
identifying and then challenging negative thoughts. But what if we could also use these implicit learning mechanisms to rewire our cognitive responses, like subtly changing our habitual reactions without having to be as verbose with our thoughts? It makes it faster and more effective. That's amazing. Think about it. Instead of just knowing the benefits of exercise, you feel the increased energy and emotional clarity that comes after a good workout, and you start craving that feeling. That becomes implicit. Your body intuitively knows that it makes you feel good, and so you naturally gravitate towards it. And in turn, that also optimizes your sleep and reduces your anxiety levels, all without a step-by-step manual. That's pretty powerful.
Yes, and if we're getting this kind of power out of algorithms, then we might be looking at a revolution of traditional health strategies. I mean, if AI can implicitly learn, maybe we can build interfaces that help us develop better life habits too. We could be looking at a future of personalized coaching where the technology almost invisibly guides us towards positive changes, and the implicit chain of thought might be the key. Right, and there is so much to research still. Like, how do you ensure that the teacher model is actually imparting healthy patterns and not accidentally encoding biases into that implicit process? That's crucial, and that gets into the ethics side of it. How do we make sure the implicit biases are minimized? It reminds me of the work I've been doing on cognitive biases and how our brains tend to default to certain thinking patterns that aren't always helpful. I am thinking we need a lot of work to ensure that these large language models aren't learning biased patterns from their training data, which would just reinforce unhealthy thought patterns.
Totally. And that's also why it's important to incorporate mindfulness and body awareness into the mix. Paying attention to how our bodies react to different activities. I'm learning that I can feel when my body feels strong and when it's tired. And that intuitive connection to your body allows you to make better choices that are aligned with what you need.
I agree, and that's where I see the potential for combining all these ideas. You can't just have an AI training you without giving space for humans to have an intuitive understanding of their bodies. What I find fascinating about the research in implicit learning is it challenges the traditional explicit models that are the norm in AI. This makes me think about how to approach large data sets in the future. Yeah, it makes you wonder about the ethical implications of that too. Like if our technology can shape our habits that implicitly, do we lose some level of free will? How do we maintain our agency in that scenario?
Yeah, and the concept of agency is so important, and it ties into the idea of self-efficacy, that your belief in your ability to influence your own life. So, the question for me becomes, how do we use these tools to empower people, not simply passively train them? How do we use these tools to amplify, not replace?
And for me, the next step is how do we personalize this? We're not all the same. I need a specific routine that aligns with my energy levels and my sleep patterns, for example. And I'm really thinking about how to best integrate these mindful exercise techniques into a holistic lifestyle program that is specific to each individual. From my perspective, the key question for research is how do we analyze unlabeled video data, because that's where we can find the deepest understanding of human behavior. And we have to be careful about how we are analyzing that data so we minimize biases. And can large concept models help us to identify and correct those errors in our methods and thinking? Yeah, I think these are some incredibly important questions. And as a next step, I'd like to see research done on the effectiveness of using daily affirmations and visualizations in conjunction with implicit training. Like, how do they affect the long-term psychological impacts and habit formation? And for me, I'm curious about how we can use mindfulness techniques within the framework of CBT to increase our ability to stay present during times of stress. I'm thinking we have to make this as practical and in the moment as possible. And I think we need more research on how to optimize sleep schedules to align with our natural circadian rhythm and how that affects exercise and overall health. I think that will be crucial for lasting change.
That's such a good point. It's all about closing the loop, like looking at ourselves to better understand ourselves and then creating technology to help ourselves more. That's where it gets really powerful. Absolutely. It's about creating a feedback loop where the technology helps us understand ourselves better, and we use that understanding to improve the tech even more. It's a constant cycle of learning and improvement. Exactly. It's not about just blindly adopting new technology. It's about using it to understand and optimize ourselves. A more conscious and healthier relationship with ourselves. Yes, and I think the next phase will be really interesting as we figure out how best to integrate human agency and compassion into these AI processes. These models are not the answers, but tools we can use to better ourselves and our understanding of the world. Well, this has been an incredibly insightful discussion. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, but hopefully, we've helped our listeners grasp the core concepts of implicit chain of thought reasoning and knowledge distillation.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, a really fascinating topic, and I think we've highlighted some crucial avenues for future research. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. I'm excited to see where this research takes us. Thanks, everyone. Likewise, a truly fascinating discussion. Thanks for having me.